that speed. I had to pull the book out and finish it.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everybody. It's great to see so many participants. And let me start off by introducing myself, because there's probably a lot of people here that don't know me. I'm Father Stephen. I'm one of the parish priests at St. John the Baptist Cathedral here in Canberra. And this is a ministry we run called Faith and Wisdom. And Faith and Wisdom is, it's to educate our adults about the faith. And if you've ever seen our little poster, it's to know our faith and to grow in our faith. It's intellectual knowledge is one thing, and so approximately every 5 to 6 weeks, we try to have what's called Faith and Wisdom Family Edition. And that's where we focus on issues relating to the family in a Christian context. And so we had because of COVID, I would usually be giving this talk on a Sunday after liturgy to a very small group. Because of COVID, we've moved online, and it's now given us the opportunity to draw on speakers from around the country, which is a real blessing for us. So tonight we are really blessed to have two Father Nicholases from Holy Protection in Victoria, and I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to distinguish when putting questions forward between the two, but I'll do my best. So we have Father Nicholas Karipov and Father Nicholas Daninkevich. Between both fathers, they have many decades of experience providing pastoral care to congregations, but also to married couples. And this topic is really important because as much as we like to think that everybody's marriage looks perfect from the outside, we all know that that's not the reality. And you only have to look at the statistics around marriage breakdown, even within the Orthodox community, to see and to understand that there's a fundamental problem. And that is that we don't necessarily have the tools to work through issues when they come up. So today's focus will be on questions of what are the most common issues that both Father Nicholases have come across, what are some of the reasons why they occur, and how can we resolve them in a loving and Christian manner. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got two excellent speakers to provide us with that advice. Now, just a bit of administration. I mentioned before, microphones are set to mute. For the purposes of the talk, please keep your microphone on mute. I will be taking questions through the chat. So if you're new to Zoom, I won't assume everybody knows it, but I would expect by now you would. At the very bottom of your screen, if you scroll to the bottom, you will see a button that says chat. Make sure if you open that up, it should be set to everybody. Feel free to put your questions through the chat, and I'll present those questions to both Father Nicholases as we go through the talk. This will be recorded. It's actually being recorded right now, and once it's finished being recorded and edited, we'll then have it uploaded to Pokrov's YouTube channel. We here in Canberra, in our parish, we don't have a YouTube channel or a means of hosting it. So they will host it on our behalf, and I'll send the link around via Facebook. So with that all said, I don't want to take up too much of the discussion time. I wanted to start off by opening it up with an open question to both Father Nicholases, and that is to ask, I suppose, if you had to pick one problem that you consistently see married couples approaching you with, either newlyweds or those that who've been married for a long time, what would that be?
Ignorance. Just, am I coming across?
Yes, Phil.
Yes. Okay. I think that many problems occur because couples going into marriage do not know enough about what marriage is supposed to be like, and don't know enough about the Christian teaching on on anthropology. Who is the human being? How do we work? How do we work within ourselves? How we work together? There is a lot that needs to be known, and unfortunately, not enough of our people know about that. And when they get to know this, they're pleasantly surprised, and they can operate much better, learning about, essential human problems. Problem number one in marriage is the same problem, is the number one problem of humanity generally, and that problem is called pride. And pride is the result of our disconnect from God, which happens in three ways. First of all, it's disconnect from the time of our forefathers, Adam and Eve. Secondly, it's the function of our family prehistory and inherited, we can talk about it even in genetic terms, inherited sort of problems. And thirdly, just what each one of us, how each one of us operates, and how that innate pride, which is not to be understood in the way that the secular world understands pride, as, sometimes sees pride sometimes as something good, okay? You've got to have pride in yourself, you've got to blah, 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 blah. But that, look, to some extent, we all use that concept of pride, and sometimes, and some aspects of that understanding are okay, as a rough guide to sort of human behavior and that. But it indicates a profound missing the mark in human life, which is an attempt to become, each one of us, our attempt to become autonomous, and as such to begin to influence and try to control and possess. That is the beginning of all human problems, control, possessions, power struggles, and that comes through in marriage. Now, the late 19th century Russian religious philosopher, Nikolai Fyodorov, he said that he wrote a book about this fundamental problem, and he called it, I found it very difficult to translate it into English, but it's something like intimacy or intimate kinship. He says that is what is lacking in human society. And that's a function of pride. So pride has fragmented humanity, and that fragmentation is felt in the marriage. And in the marriage, the fundamental problem translates into an attitude that, my rights and your rights. You are not me, I am not you. And Christianity seeks to overcome that, Christianity sees that marriage really has a residue of God's blessing going back to our forefathers. So any honest commitment of husband and wife, even if it's not a Christian marriage, it still receives that blessing, that primeval blessing. And so the family, in the context of this very competitive and aggressive world, is an oasis, and has been traditionally an oasis where a person can rest from the agony of this aggression and competition of the world, and relative spiritual and mental health. But even within that context, the love in a natural sort of a relationship of a marriage tends to be possessive, okay? When Adam and Eve stretched their hand to the forbidden fruit, they became consumers. And to consume means first to possess. You possess something or someone, and then you eat them, you consume them. You can consume literally, you can consume figuratively. And notice that as an expression of love, we say about a little baby, "Oh, you're so cute, I'd love to eat you." Okay? That expresses a deep-seated consuming and possessive nature of fallen humanity. Now, no wonder we develop problems in the marriage when our human nature is so badly damaged. Okay, now Father Nicholas and I had a conversation before we before tonight's talk, and we just sort of separated who's going to talk about what, and we decided that I would concentrate on sort of like the Christian anthropology and the theological side, and he would concentrate on something that is called by 20th century Father George Florovsky, a theologian. He talks about neo-patristic synthesis. So it's our Christianity and our modern science together, okay? So that's why he's got that whiteboard with the formula behind him. He's got a formula for marriage. Okay, now to finish off my little introduction on the theological side, well, we are given in the sacrament of marriage, in the mystery of marriage, a different model for what love is to the experience of what we find in the natural marriage, where love has degenerated to possessiveness and consumption. Okay, so in the sacrament of love, there are two models, and I can just say nothing and just show you this, because that's what it's about. It's about the Trinity here and Jesus Christ, God and man. That model is given in the marriage. The Trinitarian model is given to overcome that possessiveness in the family, in the relationship between husband and wife, where in the Holy Trinity, the Father always prefers the Son and the Holy Spirit. And the same with the Son and the Holy Spirit. They have a constant, what is called in theology, kenosis, an emptying of self, a humility, an extreme humility, where they prefer the other two, and that to prefer your spouse to yourself, to be ready to lay down your life, is, well, especially in the case of the man, of the husband, that's where it begins. Now, the other model, the Christological, or rather the ecclesiological model, that is used, the model used by St. Paul in his letter to the Ephesians, when he talks about the union of husband and wife, replicating or being modeled on the relationship between Christ and the church, that it's one body, it's an organic union, you know, there's a oneness. There's no longer, you know, this division between you and me. It's always us together. The Christian marriage has to overcome that innate pride and that innate lack of intimate kinship through, first of all, a deep readiness to understand love as sacrificial humility, based on humility, that I empty myself and I give myself, my will, my whole being to you, right? Now, that, of course, that's maximalistic. That's it's not going to happen tomorrow. But that, you know, everything in Christianity is not a destination; it's a direction. So that's the direction. And the second thing is that the ecclesiological model, the model of the church, the head and the body, talks to us about that organic unity that we have to be creating. And learning to open up ourselves to each other in total trust. No longer, you know, this position, a sort of a defensive, aggressive pose, like a boxer, you know. Okay, I'm ready. If you hit me, I'm gonna hit you back. I'm gonna punch you back, right? This is the stance in the marriage. It's look at Christ crucified. That is openness and readiness to bear the burdens of your spouse. Okay, that's enough as a little introduction.
Can I respond to that or continue?
Yeah, you can disagree.
No, I'm not disagreeing at all. In fact, on the contrary, originally to that Father Stephen's question was going to look at the problem of raising children, both from toddlers through to early teenage in particular. And then listening to your tail end of your talk, you cut across an area that was also significant. And so at this point, instead of talking about children, I'll in fact kick in from where you mentioned preferring the spouse to yourself. That's super significant. And another bit that you raised is sacrificial love. Young people in particular don't understand that. They think that love is romantic love. And they're two different things, although they can be united, romantic love and sacrificial love. And preferring a spouse to yourself is an issue that's now starting to raise its head. And that's partly because we've now reached an era where there is a clash of cultures. Not all that long ago, I was doing a wedding, and the woman in particular felt offended by the fact that she was told that she had to obey her husband. So the bits that she really got upset about was this from the epistle: wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as the church is, as Christ is the head of the church. And then husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. So it's not just one instance here, but this particular one I'm referring to was more intense, because no matter how I tried to explain this, the current world mentality prevailed, that there is husband, male is superior, female, woman is inferior, no matter what. And everything else didn't matter what I said. Couldn't convince her otherwise. She acknowledged that she understood theoretically what I was saying, but couldn't accept that in her heart. So much so that she's an Aussie, that she asked that when the excuse me, the deacon read the epistle, that he do that bit in Slavonic. So she didn't want to even hear those words. And what the young people don't understand here is a number of things. One is that the second commandment that St. Paul gave was that husbands love your wives, meaning to the death if necessary. He has to be prepared to give his life for his wife and for his children. The instruction to the wife is to just obey the husband. So the instruction to the husband is far, far more intense, more severe, but you can't get that message across. And in fact, the instructions, wives obey your husbands, that's not fixed in concrete. Years ago, I remember reading a homily from St. John Chrysostom, and he spelled this out. He said that if the husband is not capable, he hasn't got either intellectual capacity or is emotionally deficient, or so he's got issues, problems, and he cannot really run the family, then it's clear that the wife has to run the household and she makes the decisions. So even in that context from St. John himself, that it's not, as I said, fixed in concrete, that instruction. It's not an instruction, it's more of a guideline. And also, if love prevails in a family, that particular command falls away. Because if husband and wife love each other, there'll be no such thing as submitting to one another. They don't want to submit to one another. It's not an issue in life. So just through love, they would try to meet the other's needs out of love. So that's not a problem. Yet in the current world, it's manifesting itself more and more. There's to such an extent where this equality is basically replacing God himself. So that's, I think, what I'll say on that particular question. And I'll, depending on what the other questions are, I'll get back to raising the children later on, okay?
Thank you, Fathers. So I'd like to just touch on something that Father Nicholas Karapov raised, and that is pride being an underlying issue, somewhat of a genesis of a lot of problems within marriages. Father, and this is addressed to both fathers, could you elaborate on that in terms of how do you actually see that manifest in terms of the issues that come to you?
Well, on a psychological level, it manifests itself, and that's often, very soon, if not already during the so-called honeymoon period. Typically, a marriage has 3 stages, but I won't talk about them unless, we've got some time later, what they really mean, those 3 stages. But the first stage is really easy. It's the takeoff, whoa, boost the rocket, whoosh, up it goes, it works. And stage 1 typically works, in almost all marriages, 99.9% of marriages, okay? It's stage 2 that's the problem, okay? But Now, perhaps even towards the end of this honeymoon stage, it may raise its ugly head, or begin to raise its ugly head. It's a sort of a psychological tug of war, okay? And that's where pride shows itself, because, you know, pride means that I'm the center of the universe. I'm number one, you know? And so, okay, now I've got another person to deal with. So, you know, it's like pulling the blanket at night, you know, it's mine, you know, it's mine. Tug of war, okay? So I think you know what I'm talking about. So it's a sort of a challenge between two wills, okay? It's not by accident the Lord Jesus Christ, when asked by his disciples to teach them how to pray, gave the prayer, our Father, which says, "Thy will be done." Now, thy will, your will, refers first to God, and secondly, this is what I meant by, you know, sacrifice and preferring. Let your will be done. Wow, you know, that's what spouses should say to each other, okay? So that's a way of dealing with pride. And I mean, that's a big ask, you might say. You know, it won't happen straight away, but at least we need to begin by having patience with each other, you know, and sort of quietly learning about ourselves through the other person. So according to the teaching of the Holy Fathers, if you seriously want to learn about humility, and humility in Orthodox Christian teaching is the basis of all virtues. There cannot be love. There cannot be any love or any other virtue without humility. Now, Holy Fathers say, if you want to learn what humility is, know that God will send you a person to bear, okay? Bear each other's burdens. So it happens mostly in the marriage, okay? So we are sent just the right person we need for our salvation, okay? We have to accept that. And if we accept it, then we're on the way of dealing with, you know, our pride gradually, but it's not going to disappear straight away. And most likely it's not going to disappear until our last breath, but it will get smaller and smaller. So that's what it is, what it's about. Okay. I mean, I could say more, but look, I don't want to go into long monologues here.
I'll just add a little bit.
Yes.
Father Nicholas was correct, and when he said, very correct, when he said, let your will be done. And that's the ultimate formula for a marriage. That's the only way that love really, really exists in a family. I certainly accept the comment that pride's underlying all of this, but it may be more than pride. I'll go back to my parents' generation. And in fact, I'll refer to my family a bit. When Mum and Dad and I came to Australia in 1949 after the Second World War, they could speak no English. They just had one suitcase between them. They came to Australia, and this is typical of other people in that generation. And the family was immediately split. So Mum and I were in the camp. My dad had to work for a couple of years to pay off the fare to transport us to Australia. And so life was terribly difficult. Yet Dad nor Mum never had a tertiary education. Dad didn't even have a secondary education. So life was incredibly difficult for all people of that era. And yet it was accepted right across the board that people had to respect one another, look up after one another, show courtesy. These were just natural ways of living. And so in my case, even Dad worked as a labourer, and yet he was able to raise his children, brother, sister, me, and so we had a good education. He physically, with his own hands, built the little house that we lived in. Mother did her bit. She didn't have to be told by Dad, these are your duties and these are my duties. Nothing, everything just melded correctly, beautifully. Dad never had to get a single loan from a bank. In the end, he had a car, raised family. Everybody was like that. People would go on a train, young kids would get up straight away to let older people sit down. So this whole idea of how to live correctly just was natural in their souls. And largely that's due to the fact that people were genuinely God-loving. And when they went through the hardships, they understood their relationship with God, how real it was. And so life itself, so pride in that case wasn't even an issue. It was in the heart, you knew what was right, what was wrong. And the kids from a toddler all the way up lived that way. That was just the norm. Now we're in a different era where it's the me lifestyle that must prevail, and my needs have to be done. And this, I find, is happening amongst our parishioners very much so, the younger generation. It's so common to hear where there is conflict between young husband and young wife. The husband comes home from work and she straight away points out to him that he does not understand how hard it was for her to do her domestic duties, to raise the children, to look after them, to feed them. She accuses him, you don't know how hard it is for me. I want a little bit of attention from you. And he likewise responds, you don't know how hard it was for me in my job, the work that I was doing. I'm exhausted. And it's always me. I'm the one who needs attention. You're not giving me the attention. From both husband and wife. And so when this continues over time, it's like bits of sand building up a sand, like a mountain of sand between husband and wife. Individually, these things are only tiny things, small, but they just build up, they build up, build up. And all of a sudden, love itself just disappears. It becomes a formal type of existence. And it's over all these little issues, but it's me. And when I, as a priest, try to point out that we should really focus and understand each other, understand each other's hardships, and when you love one another, it shouldn't be me, it should be you. How can I help you? What is it? I'll give you a hug. I don't know, whatever's necessary. And they'll understand this theoretically, but to put that into practice is very hard. And sometimes it takes years. It does work, but you get, in the end, quite frustrated. You think, well, don't these people understand? Am I speaking a different language or something? And it's this thing that, no, my feelings are hurt. And unless they're addressed by you, my wife, my husband, we're not going to get anywhere. And so that attitude is a reflection on the society that we live in, that we're number one. You know, you heard of the Me Too movement. It's just crazy. So that's sort of a practical aspect where there is a blockage, a barrier between husband and wife and family. And it most certainly can be pride, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so. So
well, I'd like to suggest that what you're talking about really is pride. Narcissism, that's what you were talking about, you know, this memeing and whinging and stuff.
No, can I, sorry, Father,
yeah,
I interrupt.
Okay.
I once read a book that I actually got from Kuma Monastery, and this was by a psychiatrist who was Austrian. He was in the labor camp in Germany for many years, and he and his fellow inmates experienced horrific hardship. Yet, when the war finished and they were let free, a lot of these inmates committed horrific crimes on innocent people. And that's because the most difficult thing that they had to cope with was not the hardship, not the starvation, not the deaths that they experienced or witnessed, but the unfairness of why was it that they were treated like animals. And I think that that part is simply because we're made in God's image, and God's part of that image requires us to have justice, love and justice. And they felt it was so unjust that they went with these people from the camps who were freed, that they could no longer cope with the injustice that they felt, and then they would go and commit atrocities themselves. So it's sort of the opposite of pride. Pride is when you initiate your mode of behaviour, which you want to do. Here, it was a reaction. And so the two can go hand in hand. It's not always pride, that's what I'm saying. Okay? Not okay? Anyone else?
Okay, well, yes, on continuing on, you know, psychological sort of level, right? I think that many of the problems that appear in marriages relate to their own childhood experiences. And the longer I live, the more I see that almost everyone is affected one way or another by their childhood experiences, you know, and they carry these unresolved issues and things from the past that they haven't learned to cope with. For instance, they may have come from a slightly dysfunctional family, or maybe not so slightly dysfunctional. Maybe they did not get a proper role modeling, you know, where, you know, I tell young parents, you know, that beginning to have children, I say to them, look, the greatest gift that you can give to your children is your love between each other and your understanding. So your children see that, you know, they live in a secure household. You see, because it is those problems and those tensions of the parents that translate into some sort of psychological things that need to be resolved later. And if people are unaware of this, they will not know why they're behaving in particular ways when they see that, you know, something provokes them, or most likely, you know, their spouse provokes them. Okay, but it goes back to something not quite right in their childhood. Now, the other thing is that there is a lot, and Father Nicholas just spoke about this, you know, the narcissism and the immaturity, that people behave like spoiled children. You know, they have this, young adults in a marriage, they have this sense of entitlement, you know, and that causes a lot of problem. Now, it's natural for girls and young women to develop and mature quicker than boys and young men. That's just a fact of life. Women have a much more clear-cut sense of responsibility, and that causes them to mature quicker. The reason why they have this sense of maturity is because they feel with their whole being that they are responsible for the continuation of life on this planet, okay? And they may not think about it consciously at all, but that is present, you know, it's a present. Even if they don't end up having children, it doesn't matter. That sense of responsibility and nurture and looking after someone is still present in them, and it's much greater than in men. And what unfortunately happens quite a lot is that in a young marriage, the husband begins to behave like his wife is his mummy, okay? And he wants that nurturing that he received from his mother to continue from his wife. Now that's not satisfactory for the wife, but neither is it satisfactory for the husband, because he's not maturing, he's not growing up, he's not taking responsibility for his life. But it's often because he hasn't been given the proper modeling and education in the family to know what the male is supposed to do, what the head of the family, what the husband is supposed to do, and how to behave, and how to relate to his wife. And so he just continues being the child. So if they have children, he begins to sort of feel envious and jealous of the babies appearing, because he sees that they are taking away from the focus and the pampering that he received from he used to receive from his wife. So there are some of the psychological problems as well. And going back to the Trinitarian model, you see, not on a theological or spiritual level, but even on a psychological level, there has to be leadership in the family, as there is leadership in the Holy Trinity within God Himself. You know, it's from the Father through the Son in the Holy Spirit. You know, there's a circular movement. And typically, you know, I tell husbands and wives that I sometimes send them to go and do ballroom dancing. You probably will laugh. How can that help? Well, because there are many things that there's body language, there's interaction, there's a dynamic, lots of dynamics that occur in the dance. And I tell husbands and wives that the family life is like a dance, you know, and there's got to be like a, you know, ballroom dance. There's got to be a kind of an agreed cooperation and leadership. Okay, there's initiative and there's cooperation. Okay, and it's got to work intuitively, and you've got to read each other's body language. And men are notoriously bad at doing it. Women are great. Women pick up our body language, and they know what the husband, you know, is all about when he comes from work. They can see it in his face. If there's if there's any problem, and you know he's the guilty party, you know, in a small misdemeanor, like, you know, maybe she doesn't like that he pops in with his blokes for a drink or something like that. Well, she knows straight away if he's had a drink. Okay, she knows he can't hide it. Okay, but I'm saying that both not only women, but men need to learn this and to be aware of what's happening in the psyche, in the life of the most precious person in his life, his wife, okay? He needs to be sensitive to that. Men have notoriously narrow focus of vision. They only see the thing immediately in front of them and nothing else.
Father Nicholas is talking about me here.
I was thinking about you, actually. No, about some of your examples. Or when your Matsuka said that you had driven past some place and you never noticed that there was
A helicopter.
A helicopter there. Well, women are like radars. They pick up everything, okay? Men have to learn some of that. That's one of the problems in the marriage. And I started off by saying that ignorance was a big problem. And ignorance of male-female psychology and how we're supposed to work together, that is a major problem. We don't understand each other. We often expect, women expect men to understand them and behave like them, to see all of these things. Men fail to see that women are not blokes. Okay, why? And typically, a man will say to his wife, "Look, she's sort of talking to him and trying to open up with some sort of problems. She's just unloading. She doesn't want solutions. She just wants to be heard. But he tries to work out what the problem, the solution to the problem is. And in the end, he says, "Look, just don't think about it." Well, a woman can't do that. She constantly thinks. She's got an endless list of problems to think about. She can't switch off. You see, he says, "Switch off, come on." A man can do that. He can switch to another channel because he's got narrow focus. Woman can't. So these are some of the things we need to know about each other. Otherwise we're expecting the impossible, mission impossible, okay? So the more we know about who men and women are, the better it's going to be for both of us.
Thank you, Fathers. And following on that, we've had a few questions that have come up in the chat, and this is probably a good time. There's an interesting question that's come up. But before I ask that question, Father Daniel Delankovic, you actually mentioned that you were going to touch on children, but what I wanted to ask you both was, in terms of the problems that you see occurring, do you see that there's even greater pressure and greater problems arising, especially in the dynamic of the family that we live in today? So for most people, both husband and wife need to work or do work. Yeah. And then they usually have to work long hours, but then add in the factor of children, which is a completely different type of, and it completely changes the dynamic. Sorry, I'll put my phone on silent. And that changes the dynamic of the family and the relationship again in some ways. So can you just comment on those two factors?
Yeah, sure. It's very, very, very true that a major problem occurs because both husband and wife have to work. And the typical solution when they've got young children in particular, they come home and an obvious solution is to plonk them in front of the TV, even if it's just little children's shows, but that's the normal way. And that allows the parents to do their thing, to do their cooking and whatever they do. What the parents don't understand is that a child's brain develops extremely rapidly from birth through to the age of 3. That's the fastest growth rate. Then it tapers off somewhat, but still grows quite rapidly. And it's only when you approach late teenage and onwards that it sort of plateaus more or less. So what the child experiences, especially as a toddler, it literally creates neurons. It creates the brain structure depends on the sensory input that the child experiences during that period. And in conjunction with that, as the brain develops, that influences the soul. So the whole person, probably, I don't know, 80% of that person, of the child, 80% of its adulthood occurs very early in age. And so we have parents, but actually especially mothers, and I read this both in science material and in Holy Fathers as well, saying that a child experiences a mother's love far more intensely than the father's love. No matter how much the father loves a child, the father cannot convey that because the baby came out of the mother. And so this bond is dramatic. If especially again, the mother spends not a massive amount of time, but every day, a certain amount of time playing with the child, giving the child a cuddle, and experiencing, sharing her love for the child, that produces monumental results. I mentioned to Father Nicholas a little while ago that maybe 2 years ago, I read a science paper, a research paper, where the neuroscientists were doing fMRI scans on 3-month-old babies. This particular study involved parents that were either divorcing or close to divorcing, or having constant squabbles and hardships and infighting. So the scenario was this: the baby was in the MRI machine, but the parents were told to come to the baby, enter the room, and be lovey-dovey, to show that they're massively in love and at peace, and everything's fantastic. Role play. It didn't make any difference. The baby's brain fled up in the anxiety area, in the fear area. So a 3-month-old, not one, all these babies that were being tested then, every one of them, they knew straight away that when the parents approached them, they knew that there was intense conflict between their parents. And so if a 3-month-old child can pick that, and even when the parents are pretending to be good, how much damage is done as the child gets a bit older, and especially up to the 3-year mark, when they observe this, when the parents aren't pretending to be good, when they really are at loggerheads. This is just so dangerous. So you have the two opposing things. Either the child is neglected, plonked in front of the TV, and its sensory input is that. The other one is that I've just described, the conflict scenario. And of course, then the proper one is where there's the cuddles and the love for the child. And it doesn't mean that you have to spend 15 hours a day cuddling the baby, but the baby, the child, the toddler, needs to experience that love. Also, it so happens that with little boys, their father is a big role model. I'll give 2 examples. When I was still working full-time in my engineering capacity, I came across an article, it was from America, where that article was written by a priest who visited jails. And he said, without exception, every prisoner, male prisoner that he spoke to, that prisoner hated his father. And that's because when that prisoner, when he was a child, he could see that the father either rejected him or ignored him or showed favoritism to another brother in particular. So this is a psychological thing that was just very, very real. I won't name, this is way back when I was a young priest. I was visiting, I was interstate co-serving with another priest. I don't want to give the game away, but the priest was shorter than I was physically. And it was a Saturday night service, and I was just at one time just sitting on a little chair in the altar. The father was serving, and his little son came up to me, and so because I'm sitting and the son's standing, we're at eye level with one another, and he says to me, "My father is bigger than you are." And this was really telling. Why did he say this? Because physically he could see that I was taller. But that wasn't the issue. His father was so important to him that he was the king of the world. And this is how fantastic this is. This happens with fathers and sons much, much more than with girls. In fact, I'm not aware of reading anything where girls and mothers have that type of bond. So with little kids, fathers mucking around, doing things with their little kids, and especially the boys, crucial. The world that we're living in now, as we touched on earlier, where it's just so hard to make ends meet, and mum and dad can't devote any time, TV's the answer, that's very dangerous. However, there usually is a solution, and I've seen this with very dramatic results, where grandparents, and especially grandmother, comes in and devotes a lot of time to teach the kids, play games. One scenario I'm aware of, I've witnessed, where 4-year-old boy was very, very rebellious at home everywhere. Just no, just nothing. And then it took maybe, I don't know, 6 months perhaps, with the grandmother just being patient and teaching. In the end, this little boy to this day would go and say, "Baba, can we read the Bible?" He wanted to keep reading Bible stories. She would offer an opportunity to play with games, to do things. No, I'd like to hear Bible stories. It was just so dramatic turnaround. And so grandparents can be phenomenal here. A problem that does also occur, however, with grandparents is that their own children can reject the grandparents, thinking that they're intruding in their lives. And instead of making use of their resources, their love as grandparents, they reject that, and then they themselves can't cope with giving the amount of attention to the child that the child needs. So it's a different world. Things are doable, but people, both parents and grandparents, have to know that they have a role to play, and they can actually conquer the world, even this world. Okay.
Yes, I'd like to take you up on that, rather continue that topic of, the urban lifestyle, because unfortunately, high urbanization has created problems that were really unknown in traditional societies, and because your scenario that you described of both parents working, coming home, and then trying to cope with the plonking the kids in front of the box and stuff like that. Well, traditionally, of course, there was a big support network. Now you gave the example of how beneficial involvement of grandparents can be, but it's not only in the sense of helping with the children. You know what? I've read psychological studies that point to the fact that women are built in such a way that they need to communicate, well, typically with other women a lot, and that their husbands can only provide about 10%, and that's good, 10% maximum of their psychological needs. Wow. Which means there's got to be a much bigger network of communication for the woman to be, to really flower as a person, and to, you see, because women tackle their stresses by communication. In communicating with other women, they just talk things through and they feel better. Men need to switch off, turn to another channel, turn the box on, read a paper, whatever. But women need to talk. And, if the husband is already tired after work, he says, come on, I'm too tired to talk now, okay? And she has been just going mad because she doesn't have any outlet, or, the outlet at work is too superficial. Okay, she might sort of talk to a few other women very superficially at work, but it's not enough. So that is something that we really need to learn to overcome creatively. And the church as a community is certainly has all the potential of replicating the community of the village, right? So even if it's an urban parish, if we're creative, we can learn how to find new roles, and it's fulfillment and help not only for the struggling young parents or young couples, but maybe for older people to get involved. It doesn't matter if you don't have even grandparents living in the same city. You can adopt grandparents. In our family, there was a guy, just Nikolai, Father Nicholas knows him. He died back in the early 90s, but he used to help massively at church. You remember Andrei Ulyanovich?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, not only did he help massively at church, and he was like, to me, when I came in 1981, he was like a father to me. Okay, he was so caring. But he then, because he had no family except for, he actually had a daughter who lived further away, and that he wanted to be connected to a family, and he became our adopted grandfather because, Matushka's parents were in Russia and mine were in Sydney. So we had, him helping. He was just a fantastic, childminder. There were other people as well. They came on board, other people from the parish, and that can happen. And we have to energize I know that this might be the wrong time to talk about it when we've got lockdowns, especially in Victoria, that are so horrendous, but God willing, it won't last forever. And we can get back to normal, community life. And the church is not just for me to go there and to pray and then to leave. It is to build bonds. The early church was intensely aware that the church was community building, but it went beyond that. It was a transformational experience. As Christ says, if we make sacrifices, we will find other parents and brothers and sisters within the church, okay? And we'll find aunties and uncles and grandparents, people who may not have had children who are willing to help. This is in the case of, you know, child minding, but also what about just contact, especially you women? You need to communicate with each other, okay? Sisterhood, sisterhood power, right? And you need to help each other, and then you will be happier when, you know, when you face your husbands, and your husbands won't feel, you know, constantly defensive that they can't satisfy your psychological needs.
Thank you, fathers. I do have a few questions that have come through on the chat, and I should get to them because time is moving along. So I'll start off with this first one. It's a very interesting question. It says, sometimes in times of divorce, people say that the couple should probably never have gotten married. With that said, which types of single people should not be looking to get married in the first place? So are there certain types of people who probably should avoid marriage that's open to either fathers?
I don't think there's a mathematical formula, because people are not only different from other people, we vary within ourselves. Today I'm in a lousy mood, tomorrow I'm happy. The dynamics is just sort of a constant flow of emotions, and just my simple advice is that when people meet and fall in love magically, instantly, not to rush, but to extend that relationship. If you want a figure, I'd say certainly a year, maybe more. And so that by the time they mature together, they will know in their hearts reasonably well whether this is worth going for or not. But when they try to sort of fall in love rapidly, and I think right now in our society here, in the Western world, in Australia, because it's just so hard for an Orthodox girl to find a sensible Orthodox guy, it's just like mission impossible. You wonder what goes on in their heads, in the guys' heads. And so often the girl will feel, well, if I don't take this guy who's showing interest in me, if I don't take him seriously and try to establish a permanent relationship, I may never get married. And that's just super difficult decision to make. And so much so that they could even threaten her orthodoxy. I'll give one example, again, no names. This is a few years ago. A youngish woman rang me up, I think it was a Saturday night, and she met this Aussie guy, and she got pregnant, and he insisted that she have an abortion, and she rang me up saying she's going to have an abortion, and we spent about 4 hours on the phone. And her logic, she was trying to console herself to justify herself for that very reason, that she may not get a husband, was that, well, God forgives everything, and so he'll forgive this. And I said to her, you're playing games with God here. And I said, and then take this scenario that God absolutely forgives you, and way down the track, you die. And because God's forgiven you, you've gone to heaven. And lo and behold, you turn around and you see that little baby that you aborted next to you. I said, how are you going to react? How are you going to behave now? The baby's not going to accuse you. The baby will have nothing but love for you, but that's going to make it even extra difficult for you. And every time you see that baby, you in heaven will be experiencing through guilt, mini hell. I went down a path, and about 4 hours later, she agreed. And she said, okay, Father Nicholas, I'll keep the baby, but you have to be the godfather. And that's what happened. So I sort of lost track of the question now.
It was just about whether certain people should
right,
marry.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that in our era, as distinct from in the past, when nearly everybody believed in God, at least some sort of God, now they're attacking God, and God is just someone that's a nuisance in this world. And so even people who are raised in orthodoxy find that this pressure to get a husband or a wife, for that matter.
Yeah.
And so they will jump at the chance to get whoever they can get, and that's wrong. So they know in their hearts it's not right, but they're not prepared to risk that. And so the maths break down. It's not a mathematical formula that you can say, yes, this person's ideal, this is not ideal. It's what if I don't get anybody else? That's a real issue. And somebody who's got half a brain, that's the problem, as I said.
Yeah. Father, if there are other questions, maybe we need to move quicker because, you know, I could add more to that particular question, but maybe we need to move on to other questions. It's up to you to decide.
Yes, Father. And we have a few questions. And in fact, the next question actually follows on from Father's last answer. And that is, and maybe Father Nicholas Karapov, you can take this. How do you distinguish between a genuine burden to help on our journey to salvation and an incompatibility unsuitable couple?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you say that again? It didn't quite register in my brain.
Yes. So the question is, how do you distinguish between a genuine burden to help on your journey to salvation, as you were both discussing earlier, and an incompatibility unsuitable couple? So I suppose...
Okay, I understand the question.
Yes,
so the question is this. Is it possible to say that people had made a mistake in choosing each other, you know, in order to get married, and so they should not have gotten married? That's what the question is about. That the burdens that they chose were beyond their capacity to carry them. That's what the person seems to be asking. And so what's the further question? Is the question about should they divorce or should they carry the burden that is deemed to be impossible? So what's the question?
I think, Father Nicholas, the bit that you're missing out on is the bit that concerning salvation. So if they're married, compatibility.
Yeah. Okay, right. Well, look, of course, every marriage is given potentially for, you know, it's one of the major path to salvation. Because normally Christians have you know, two paths. Either they get married, traditionally the vast majority, or a small minority, you know, don't get married, and they dedicate their life to God, maybe in the monastic sense or whatever. Okay, so there are just two basic kind of like paths towards salvation. The marriage as a community, and you know, a kind of a solo life serving God, which of course can be, you know, a big path towards salvation. Now, the question there, as I understood, was that some people perhaps have undertaken greater burdens than they can carry, and so these burdens are not helping for their salvation. So should they still carry them or not? Is that the question?
Don't think so.
All right. Well,
I think, as I understand, because you're going down the right path, but I want you to clarify.
All right. Yeah.
The way I understood it was that if the couple finds that they are not compatible in terms of religious belief, if you like, and so one partner says this is a path we should go down together to get saved, but the other partner says, well, that doesn't interest me. and they got conflicting views on salvation, but they're already married. I think that's what it's about. So compatibility and the journey to God.
And I think, in a sense, what they're asking is, I mean, every marriage has its ups and downs, and it has its tribulations. And how do you distinguish between that, which is every single couple is going to have to deal with,
Yes.
as opposed to there's something fundamentally defective in the relationship. There's an incompatibility. There's something that makes them unsuitable from the very start, possibly. How do you distinguish between the two? And in effect, in the second scenario, where it's an incompatibility, unsuitable situation, it's possible that you can't necessarily resolve that issue, as opposed to, you know, the other issues we're discussing, where you work together as a couple and you work through those difficulties. So how do we distinguish between those two? Because I think in today's society, you have a lot of married couples who they get to a hurdle. It's too hard. Well, obviously we're not suitable for each other.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that. That's not necessarily the case. It's just that we've learned as a society that especially with marriage, that we try to teach our children to learn from to work through their problems, to work through their issues, and to resolve them. But when it comes to marriage, it's, well, when we get to a point where it's just too hard, we bail. We just jump ship.
Well, okay, I see, Father. I think that people, if they have a responsible attitude towards their marriage, should seek help. You know, if they've encountered problems that they cannot seem to solve themselves, they have to try and get another person into the equation to perhaps guide them, make them see what the problems are. Because I think that to a large extent, people just don't know how to get out of the certain problems that they've encountered, because they don't have enough knowledge of how these dynamics work. If they can get someone whom they can relate to, someone who has rapport with them, empathy, you know, maybe a priest for starters, maybe a priest will suggest a psychologist, a counselor. That needs to be done, because you can't, you know, a marriage is a huge spiritual and emotional and physical, material investment. It's a
We've lost you, Father Nick.
We've lost Father Nicholas. Yes, mid-sentence.
So surely you need to get some consultant in to help you, you know, and see if you can wriggle out of the problems, and someone who can unravel the situation and maybe make it work. So some sort of counselor, a third party, very important. I think that's the first answer. Secondly, I mean, give yourself some time before you burn bridges, and be open, be honest. Truly want to see the other side, not just me, and me. Because often enough, when people get into a situation, is because both their egos are bruised already, and when they come to a counselor, they begin pointing the finger at each other. There's no conversation. It's a mutual monologue. That's the problem. If you want help in a marriage, and marriage is a massive investment, as I said, you have to be ready to do some work.
Yeah, I agree. I'll add a little bit to that. There are two fundamental problems here. One is where it's just it's a married couple without children. And if they have this issue of compatibility in beliefs, as distinct from being overloaded, they ultimately can agree to coexist peacefully. So one person's Orthodox, goes to church, the other one says, I'm not interested, I actually don't even really believe in that. They can still live as a family, respecting each other and coexist. That's not the main problem. The main problem is when you have little children, especially little children, and then what they will do, they will almost always follow the path of least resistance, meaning they will follow that parent that doesn't go to church. That's the easier lifestyle. So it's a lot, they would rather go out and play the footy with dad if he's the one that doesn't want to go to church, and muck around and relax and watch TV and whatever they do. It's a lot easier than to go into church and having to be standing for a little bit even in church for a child. It becomes extremely difficult to raise those children in an orthodox way. And so you are correct, Father Nicholas, that there needs to be counselling, but I would suggest that counsellors vary so much that this is ecological counsellors, that it's important to find an orthodox psychologist, and there are. And then that psychologist can take on board very seriously the religious issues and help work their way through that. Otherwise, the non-religious psychologists will give you just politicians' answers in the end and solve nothing.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Fathers. A question regarding grandparents, because Father Nicholas, you may raise the issue about the important role that grandparents can play, especially when you've got two very busy parents. This question is, with grandparents, what if they are non-Orthodox or not even Christian, for that matter? Does that make a difference?
I don't see that that's necessarily a problem. And in a sense, Father Nicholas already addressed that, because he said that you can other members of the community, although he was referring to Orthodox ones, I would imagine, who can substitute for Orthodox grandparents, or they may not be grandparents. I've seen families where, Orthodox families where indeed one side of the family is in mixed marriage. You'll have non-Orthodox grandparents, and yet there's a loving relationship with the little ones, with both Orthodox grandparents and non-Orthodox grandparents. That can absolutely work well, no question about it. Of course, unless there's some sort of indoctrination attempts being made by the non-Orthodox ones in particular, then there's a bit of a problem there. But otherwise, in principle, it's okay. I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Father Nicholas Koropov, did you have anything to add to that before I?
About grandparents, if they're not Orthodox.
Or Christian, for that matter.
Or Christian. Look, I think that if, for instance, well, obviously, we're talking about at least one of the parents being Orthodox and, committed Christian. I think that they need to assess, as Father Nicholas said, that there's no damage there, and sort of correct any wrong ideas in a loving way. I mean, obviously, they need to have access to both sets of their grandparents if there's a mixed marriage, and look, I think with a proper discerning and intelligent and wise approach, a parent, say a mother or a father, can guide the children and explain to them. I mean, when they grow up, they have to go to school, and there's plenty of like they'll hear from their own peers at school, you know, that there's no God, it's all rubbish and stuff like that, you know. So they'll have to deal with that too. There's plenty of that.
It's a big deal. That's a big problem, that, and especially as they grow up into teenagers.
Yeah. So preempting that, you know, in a little way when they're little, exposing them through, you know, maybe non-Christian grandparents who are nevertheless loving to their grandchildren, you know, it might be a way of kind of getting vaccinated for the future attack of these viruses, atheistic viruses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Fathers. I'm aware of the time. We've been going on for an hour and a half, and so I think we will leave it at that. I know there's a few more questions that have come up, but I don't want to continue to take it. Can you
just simply read what the questions are for us to contemplate for later, maybe?
Yes, of course.
Well, you can, all right, so just read them out.
Yes. And
then you can send them to us in written form.
Yeah, sure. And I'm happy to send them out. So I think, sorry, I was just trying to scroll through the... do priests have a role in helping their single parishioners find their spouse? I really hope the answer to that is no. For myself, first and foremost.
But we've been matchmakers, you know, not a few times.
I thought that would be the answer. And the next question is, how would we protect young children from being indoctrinated by non-Christian grandparents? And I think we may have just touched on that to some degree. So they were the final two questions that have popped up. And if there's anything further, Fathers, you'd like to add before we conclude for the night?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'd like to invite you, all the group, to listen to our fortnightly theological talks that we do in Brunswick, 7:30. Next one's next Sunday, isn't it, Father Nicholas?
Yes, we have
7 p.m.
Two talks next Sunday. We're continuing, first of all, I'm doing sort of a series called Introduction to Orthodox Christianity, sorry. And as part of that, I've started talking about the Creed. And because last Sunday was the first time that the first article talking about God as a creator, I invited Father Nicholas to present some sort of scientific stuff, you know, and talk about creation and science, because that's his interest. So unfortunately, because of the lockdowns and all sorts of technical problems that we suddenly encountered on the day, that could not be, you know, he couldn't give the talk. So it'll be given next Sunday. So he's giving the talk on creation and science next Sunday. And it'll actually take 2 sessions, I believe. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Thank you, Fathers. And quickly before we wrap up for the night and conclude with prayer, for those, this is the Faith and Wisdom Family Edition, and as I said, that's held every 5 to 6 weeks. So look out for announcements for the next coming talk. For those who are interested, Faith and Wisdom is online every week, each Sunday at 1:30 in the afternoon. It goes for 45 minutes, and we cover a variety of topics. Also tomorrow evening, each Monday evening, we have Bible study, and we're currently going through the parables across the as they appear throughout the four Gospels. Again, all of these are on Zoom, and so are available for anybody to attend, even post-COVID. We hope to be able to continue to provide that service. Can I please thank Father Nicholas, for your time and your advice and your guidance. And it may be that at some point we do maybe a part 2 on this, because this is not, this is a very big topic, and there's a lot to cover, and it may be better that we do. And thank you everybody for attending tonight on a Sunday evening. By the way, this has been recorded, and as soon as it will be available on the Porker of Holy Protection YouTube channel. So we don't have a facility like that for St. John the Baptist, but it will be available through their parish's YouTube channel. And yes, hopefully tonight's talk was of some assistance to you all. Fathers, would one of you like to conclude with prayer?
Okay, Father. Let me find my English cheat sheet. Because, yes, wait a minute. Look,
it is truly
probably quicker for you to, I'm just trying to look.
Yes,
here, I found it.
Okay.
It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed, the most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, beyond compare, more glorious than the seraphim. Without corruption, thou gavest birth to God, the word, true Theotokos, see to be magnified.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, fathers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a blessed week.